Hello there, Shakers. Welcome to another episode of MindShack Podcast. This podcast has been developing and growing beyond our expectations.
We would really love to thank you. That's all. And we hope you enjoyed today's video.
Hello. Greetings, Dumelang and Jambo. My name is Nongebo, aka Noni. Welcome to season 4 of the MindShack Podcast. We are a Gen Z podcast that focuses on discussing societal issues, entrepreneurial leadership, culture, and border on topics of psychology for Africans. All we do is shake out the cobwebs on social issues we see in the world today in an African way. In the language of African literature, a Kenyan writer speaks of language having a dual character. He explains that it not only functions as a means of communication, but also as a carrier of culture. Storytelling has been incredibly entrenched in African culture since the time of immemorial. Armed with tales of creatures that go boom in the night, bugs that talk, and old men with walking sticks, African elders have taught us about life lessons and how to understand our cultures. Although we are in the 21st century, technology and socioeconomics have changed completely. But the one thing that hasn't changed is the fact that Africans won't stop telling stories in a way that reminds them of their ancestry and their customs. So Mindshakers, welcome to season 4, episode 5. Before I go too far, today I'm joined with my co-host, Jean-Claude, aka JC. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I don't know if the audience knows my full government, but I think they do. They should.
I think you've done the whole thing with your surname before.
At some point, someone must have said it. But JC, really excited to be on this episode. It's going to be a good one. Our guest already, as I said, has been giving us pretty good energy. I said that to her before the session got recorded. So I'm excited to see some of the insights we get from it.
Thank you so much. And our guest today, as JC has said, is South African writer, editor, and social commentator, and a global citizen, Khanyi Mlaba. How are you doing, Khanyi?
Hi, I'm great. I'm very, very honored to be here. I'm quite excited about this topic in general, but also excited that you thought of me for this because I have quite a few thoughts and I'm really interested to bounce these ideas off of other young Africans as well, you guys. But yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you. So, we're speaking about the African narrative. As kids, my mom would always tell us stories about the boogeyman and how he's going to come and get us because we don't want to listen to our parents. I think it was my first recollection of stories in an African way. I just want to know, do you have any recollection of your first African story? And can you tell us what the story and the moral of the story was?
I don't know what my recollection of my first African story was, but I do know, to take it to a completely different medium, the first time that it really hit me, the power of African storytelling, is as a family, we would always watch MindShack, which, was a television show in South Africa. And so the power of storytelling just really hit me there. And so it wasn't like a fable or anything. It was just, these guys who would just make the whole of South Africa laugh through their storytelling, through their physical storytelling, through their, verbal storytelling. It was just so, it just imparted on me such a memory that's quite rich in how I really want to tell stories. Because whenever you hear a story, you want to feel something. Mm-hmm. So whenever I think about MindShack, I always remember feeling that, one, I'm always with my family, and two, there's always going to be laughter. There's always going to be something that's going to make me laugh. And it also highlighted at the time, and I think I might be going too deep into it, but watching it at the time as a kid also highlighted the way that a Black person's life is different to a white person's life. And it wasn't in a stark, dark, visionary way that, a lot of storytelling about apartheid and the past and all of that does. It was quite about okay, we have different lives and this is how we're living ours. And I kind of got to see that through MindShack, and it was just, I think that was the first time I was damn, African storytelling is just awesome. It's just dope.
That's actually really funny that you speak on that specific show, because for those that don't know, the background of the show is at a hostel. And in South Africa, when the apartheid regime came in, there were hostels for men that were working in large cities like Johannesburg and Durban and Pietermaritzburg. So the kind of storytelling also sort of brings in the history of the country, but it was a comedy and it was all fictional characters. There was no one that you would ever meet in real life, but you have like a memory of someone in your life that would be that way.
Exactly.
Speaking of the fictional characters, do you have any favorite fictional or non-fictional characters, and why do you think they sort of stand out to you?
I will say I have a favorite book, and my favorite character in that book is a woman named, so my favorite book is called The Night Circus. And my favorite character is Celia. And the reason why is because she's so charming and like so understated, but so powerful. And I think a lot of characters like that in most storytelling these days is, I was just watching Cinderella, not Cinderella. What's that one with Hilary Duff? I'll tell you now. But there was a Cinderella story. Cinderella story I was watching. And I think watching Regina King, it wasn't like such a massive role for her, but like just watching her being so charming, so understated, yet so powerful in that role. I always like gravitate to people who have that kind of, I don't know, energy in a story. And I think that's why I enjoy reading about, like I read The Night Circus every year during Christmas. And so every time I read it, I'm like, this girl's cool. She's very cool.
I'm really glad that you're actually speaking about also Black characters being played by Black sort of actors and actresses. And the fact that you can sort of find your own biases and what you're into as a person in the storyline. And that's the sort of power that storytelling can actually tell.
Yeah, it's quite important, I think.
Yeah. JC?
Yeah, let me slide on through. I think there's something that seems kind of interesting about your story that I want to build on. So we saw this story that basically showed the importance of storytelling to you. I want to understand, because I was probably at a young age, I want to understand when you actually, between that point till you actually started putting pen to paper and whatever the case was for you in writing, and the depth of that meaning in you and what that's like, how, if you potentially chose that to be the rest of your life, why you chose it to be the rest of your life.
Sure. I come from a family of storytellers. So I have quite a few actors in my family. My grandfather was a radio host on Ukhozi FM. And so like we have that quite built into our family. And in terms of when I realized how powerful storytelling is and how that translated into where I am now, from watching stories back in the day, so from watching Mzini Wezintsizwa, from listening to the Ukhozi FM stories on the radio, from watching The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and like really hearing stories from people like us, and like hearing like, that it doesn't always, because that's something that I wasn't old enough to understand, was that a lot of the misery in most of the storytelling about Black people was real. So when I was younger, I was like, oh, this can't be real. Like, what? So that's why I gravitated a lot more to the funny things, like, the stories on the radio, like Mzini Wezintsizwa, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And so when I realized that you could just tell these fun stories and just enjoy telling people, like enjoy talking to people and telling people things, no matter how that comes out, like I think it registered to me that I could do that too. I could start like creating stories and start writing things and start, experimenting with the different ways that I do stories. And so pen to paper, I think the first time I wrote something just for me was a fictional story about my family when I was 8. And I don't know where it is anymore. And I don't remember what it said. But it was, I was at that age where I was like, I want to do what these people are doing. I want to talk to people, not just through the words that they hear directly from my mouth, but through the words that like I've written, or through the words that I've like given to someone else to speak, or through the words, or through the motions. And there's so many different ways to tell stories. And I think that's what kind of stuck with me when I was watching those shows, and what kind of stuck with me when I listened to the radio and stuff like that. And yeah, from like 8, I knew I wanted to tell stories. And then from 15, I knew I wanted to be a journalist.
Okay. Now, building off the part where you talked about stories being told in a certain light, right, about us as Africans, what do you think is kind of gone wrong there in the underrepresentation or the misrepresentation of what stories are being told? And then also, what do you think can assist potentially, already kind of diving into in changing that, us playing a part in changing that?
I don't think any. Firstly, I want to put out there that, like Noni was saying at the beginning, African storytelling and Black storytelling has been there, and it's been there from the beginning. And so I don't think anything has particularly gone wrong in terms of what went wrong with African storytelling itself. I think there's some people who recognized it, and then there were other people who didn't recognize it. And the pity lies in the fact that the people that didn't recognize it tend to have the most power. It's usually the white people, it's usually the people that sign off stories, it's usually the people that decide what goes out into the world. And so I don't think that's something that is particularly of the storyteller's fault. I think it is a systematic thing that needs to change. If that makes sense. And so I think what needs to start happening is that, and it's going to be impossible, but hopefully soon, is that people really do need to start recognizing Black storytelling and African storytelling and other storytelling from the global South, not just Black and African, South Asian, Latin American. That kind of storytelling needs to be put on a pedestal so that it doesn't just, it's not just a pity, hey, we'll just give you this Oscar because you're Black, or we'll just do this for you because you're African, and we'll just tell your story because you'll be our token. It needs to be done in an intentional way so that our stories are recognized, and so that they're appreciated for what they are, rather than being some sort of pity of the past. Oh, we know that people didn't recognize you in the past, and so what we'll do is we'll recognize one of your stories now. And we need that to change. We need that narrative to change. Our stories need to be recognized not because we're Black and we're African. They need to be recognized because they're good stories and they're important to be told.
That's actually very key. I was just speaking to someone about the fact that there's a lot of boycotting of the Oscars and all these different sort of commissions that make sure that stories are told and movies are put out and there's awards. There's a lot of boycotting in that industry. Do you think that the key role of the media or mainstream media has been diluted by the fact that there's Black and whites, or because there are people that, you spoke about the fact that some people have power and some people don't in that industry. Do you think that there's something they can do to assist that role?
That's a very good question. And I think it does have to do with the polarization of roles in the media and in all of these institutions. We take it so for granted that our faces and our representation is so new to those spaces, and by new, I mean 20, 30 years ago. And some people weren't born 20, 30 years ago, but that's still fresh. The people who have had the say-so and the thumbs up for so long have been in those positions or have had their forefathers in those positions for hundreds of years. And so for us to finally be breaking through in the last couple of decades, it's kind of difficult for the narrative to change entirely and very quickly. And so I think it's really important for there to be that kind of disruption. Don't you? I think the disruption of boycotting and because that's what you need. You need some sort of disruption so that people can see you. It sucks. I wish it would be a thing of just look at me and then you'll see me. No, you have to disrupt to be hey, see me, look at me. So I think it's important. And I do think it's the fault of this polarization of systematic injustice. But yeah, I don't know, I'm posing to you guys now. What do you guys think about systematic uprisings making a change for these institutions and for storytelling?
JC, do you want to speak on that first? Because I'm
I can shoot. I guess I'm the expert here. No, I'm just kidding. I really don't have anything of real depth to anyone that's listening to this, take it with a grain of salt. I'm just a guy. But what I would say is I agree mainly with what you're saying, the most part of what you're saying. If as humans, we're so quickly attracted to negative stories, something about a negative notion that triggers us to pay attention, right? And sometimes it's that disruption. That disruption is that thing that causes us to pay attention to something that's deeper and people are trying to put a sort of movement and act towards. So I believe, and I've had this conversation with peers about why do people riot, and why do riots, or, for lack of a better word, why they're the ones that make people move and action on certain things. And I just think sometimes, in the narrative of telling stories, sometimes you need that to build the story. Like the story has an arc, and sometimes that's part of what the arc is, like talking about how much fight went into setting something straight, or setting a new record, or changing a policy, or whatever the case is. So yeah, to the largest extent, I agree. I think it's a little sad that sometimes that's what's needed for us to pay attention and change things. But in certain ways that it's been done, it's proved to be very, very changing in the environment, in the communities that exist. I've got an example in mind, but I've rattled off a little bit too much of my time. And so I'm going to hand over to Noni.
I will say, though, just to jump in on your point, is that and it's a good point. I don't think, disruption particularly has to be quite physical and quite violent, and that we see disruption can be just as simple as pointing out that you said my name wrong. And that's disrupting someone in their way, So I think disruption, there's time for disruption. There's different forms of disruption. And we have to be so sensitive enough to understand how and when to do something, so that when we disrupt, it has power. But yeah, I definitely agree. The negative side of things always leads. I know in journalism school, one of the things that we learned was, if it bleeds, it leads. And that always sank in my stomach. Why does it need to bleed? Can't it just lead? Can't it just go? But yeah, no, I agree with you.
I mean, I could definitely agree with both of you. I think for me, I've sort of learned that there's a sort of duality. As much as we need to have disruptive stories and disruptive ways of making sure that our stories are told, we also need to just build our own tables, just build our own systems. But also, as much as there's systematic or systemic sort of racism and issues that have been set up behind the scenes to ensure that we don't have the resources to actually build our own tables, there's always someone who's willing to go the extra mile to make sure those things are sort of available to us. I mean, you look at different storytellers, off the top of my head, Ava DuVernay or Issa Rae, who've just created ways of telling stories for Black people, but stories that are not negative or positive, that just are. And it's not an easy thing to do for Black people, because for us, we've sort of been told that our stories are either no one's going to like it, no one can connect with it. But here we are with stories like what you said, Mzuni Wezinsizwa. Who would have ever thought a story about 5 men living in a hostel room would ever be such a big TV show? It's like a prime time TV show for Black people to watch. You would have never thought. Whereas we were always told that stories that incorporate whiteness and the Western sort of narrative are the only ones that actually help. They probably don't. The percentage already in the world, we have more Black people than white people. So really, who's gonna connect to our stories? And it's really the truth. We all need to be disruptors in our own spaces, especially when it comes to storytelling. But we also need to just find a way to tell our own stories in our own communities, in our own spaces.
I agree with that. And I think I want to add to the building your own table. When you build your table, make sure that you once your table's built, you make the space for other people to come and sit at your table, because that's what we don't have. We don't have spaces where we can sit at other people's table while providing the time to build our own. But yeah, I definitely agree. I think that's a very fair point.
This is a thank you to you, a mind shaker, a listener of this episode. We highly appreciate you joining in on all of these episodes. If you can just take a second to share this link to someone to have them tap into these episodes, that will be so highly appreciated. You are the fuel to what we're doing here. So please share the link, please like, please comment, please subscribe or follow in whichever platform you're in. And we will see you on the next episode as you continue to fuel us through. Thank you.
Perfect. Question number 1. Never have I ever gone onto WebMD to check out my medical symptoms.
Oh, I did this last week. So I have. I have. And this is not good for a journalist because I should be using proper sources. But like when you need the answers, you need the answers. So yes, I have.
I'm guessing you've had cancer a couple of times then.
Oh yeah, like, and an aneurysm was coming on strong. Like, there's no shame. It's okay.
I won't judge you. I do it all the time. Never have I ever wanted to switch careers.
Jobs, yes. Careers, no. So I have, but I haven't. I don't know if that makes sense. So like jobs, if I was in a job that I didn't quite, I felt like I could grow more, then yes. But career, I've always wanted to be a journalist. So since I was 15, I knew that this is where I wanted to go. So.
Oh, you're so blessed to know what you wanted to do. So never have I ever regretted making a purchase.
I'm sure I have. I just can't think of it. When I make a purchase and it's a regrettable purchase, I try to convince myself that it's the right thing to do. And so I just live with it. Like you just kind of have to go with it. We're in the no regrets phase of our lives. It's okay.
You sound like my mom every time she makes a bad purchase. It's fine. We'll use it somehow.
You always need, you never know when you're going to need it as well. So you keep it for like 10 years, whatever it is, you'll keep it for like 10 years. And like one day someone will come through and be like, you know what, I need this one thing. And you're like, I've got you. So
I'm trying so hard not to judge you. Never have I ever broken a bone.
I have. I broke my thumb. So it's a weird one, but nevertheless.
Doing what?
I slammed my thumb in a car door. And so like the tip bone of my thumb broke and it turned blue, which was kind of cool, but kind of gross at the same time. So yeah.
Yeah, that's important. I've actually nearly done the same. Maybe it's like a thing when we're growing up that doors just slam on your fingers. You either come out with a broken finger or not. I have a story where when I was like 7 or so, my dad didn't see that I had my fingers underneath the hood while he was working on it. And he closed it on all of my fingers.
Oh my God.
10 of them. I literally couldn't get my hands out until he opened it again. Like he just heard me screaming. And then he was like, he looked around and then he was like, oh, that doesn't look right. Half of those fingers are inside the car. So then he eventually pulled it out. For some reason, I didn't take any damage. I was just in pain for like a couple of minutes and then it went away. So I know what that.
My favorite thing is your dad's like response. It's like, oh, that doesn't look right. Not like my son's in pain. It's like, oh, that wasn't like that before.
Typical dad response.
I love it.
I don't know. The slamming of doors, guys, what's going on in your families?
Guys, no, doors are a trap, okay? Like they're like an enemy of progress. You never know. You never know when that one's gonna like be ready to attack. Like your belt loop will get caught in a door handle. You, I don't know, kick your foot on like the side of like the door. Like doors are the enemy, actually.
I'm not gonna judge. Trying very hard. Okay, never have I ever hated working with team members.
I have not.
What a blessing.
Because when you work with someone and your priorities don't align, or if you're not in, you don't have the same method of working, or you have some sort of a disagreement, that's like a way for you to learn how to work with different kinds of people. So I don't think I've regretted working with anyone, and I don't think I've been unhappy working with anyone in particular.
What a blessing. So never have I ever gone vegan, or at least tried to go vegan.
I have never, but I don't eat red meat. So I gave it up in 2015, and now we're like slowly trying to see how to reduce my carbon footprint. But yeah, I have never gone vegan though, because I know that that's a commitment. Like, whew, it's a commitment.
How did you give up red meat?
The real answer is I don't know. I just did. I was like, I'm gonna stop eating red meat one day, and then I did. And then a couple of months into not eating red meat, I was like, I could go for a Steers burger. Like, there's nothing that I want right now, but like not even like the top of the range, like just, those like cheap, like rave burgers. So I was like, I could go for one of those. And so I like went to Steers and I got the burger and everything. And when I ate it, I was like, yeah, I can live without this. And so yes, since then, never.
You're brave. I really couldn't.
I mean, I still eat chicken. So chicken, fish, like all the others, but like just not red meat.
You know what? Trying so hard. Not just.
I'll do it for the both of us. It's okay.
Thank you. Last question. Never have I ever been awake for 2 days straight.
I have, and it was very recently, because I work at Global Citizen, and we had a 24-hour event just in September. And so I was awake for, I want to say 21 of those 24 hours. I might have like dipped in and out of, I don't know, but like, it was great. It was fantastic. And, like that kind of like, you know what? It sucked being awake the entire time, but it was worth it. So it was recent. If you mean back in my youth, I will never tell.
Absolutely. JC, do you want to go into the next question? Should I take it over?
Let me take a quick question. I think I asked this question in some weird form earlier. Here's the way I'm going to form it. What role do I have to play, especially on that closing thought that you have there? People outside of like you being the leaders that are telling stories and being journalists and things of that nature, an individual. What role do they have to play when it comes to storytelling? Like, yeah, we talked about getting onto the table and creating the table for yourself. What does that actually mean for a person hearing? Sounds nice, but like a little bit of depth and understanding of what it means for a person just hearing that.
Well, I think we underestimate, like as a citizen, what you can do. I think we underestimate the power of sharing. And we think that power has gone because like we can be so trigger happy with sharing on, social media and stuff, but we underestimate it because stories get around because they have been shared. A story is not a story if it's just you and yourself and you. That was not English. But like it doesn't get told if it's just you alone. And so we underestimate. So you as a citizen, the best thing that you can do to really uphold that is to share. And if you don't have the power to share, if you don't have some sort of like capacity to share, that's okay too, because the next power is listening. And there's different ways of listening, whether that's reading an article, whether that's listening to a story on a podcast or listening to your friend or someone tell you a story. Listening is so important and so powerful. And you can only get someone to come sit at your table if you listen to their story, if you listen to why they need to sit at your table. And so listening and sharing, I think, are very underestimated, especially in this day and age when we think that, oh no, like if I don't have 30 shares or like 100 shares or whatever it is on my Instagram post or like likes or whatever it is, we think that the story is dead. The story is not dead. Okay, if one person shares it, the story still lives on. If one person hears it or one person reads it, the story still lives on. And that's the role that citizens can play, is by like living the story through reading it and living it through sharing it. And if you want, you can definitely, I think the most important thing is also challenging it. Like if it's something that you're not privy to or something that you're not agreeable to, challenging it is important as well, and being open to someone challenging you back is also important. So I think there's so much that people can do that they don't realize that they can do in the frame of being a storyteller without actually telling the original story.
I'm very glad.
Does that answer your question?
Let's just
Very much so.
I'm very glad that you actually spoke about that because, I mean, I've been having a back and forth with my 13-year-old niece about social media and how to use social media with a positive sort of mindset, and how sharing good stories and positive stories, but also just sharing her own experiences in real life, because there might be someone that she can help, especially with the kind of family structure she has, where she lives, what she goes through as a young girl. Like, it's really great to sort of get that reiterated in my mind, because I think it's such a great tool. Social media is such a great tool for people to share stories, to speak on their stories, but also to challenge the status quo and what the narrative actually is for Africans.
I agree.
So
I think that's so
story,
important. Yes.
Sorry about that. Speaking about stories, if there was one story you could tell the world about where you're from, what would the moral of the story be?
Oh my God. Why? What? That's such a hard. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Sorry.
One story about where I'm from. I don't think I would tell a story about myself. I would tell a story about my mother, because I feel like this is like such an African woman tale. It's like, oh, let's tell a story about my mother. But it's true. Our mothers are amazing. Okay, they're so cool. So I would tell a story about my mother, and just looking at, the first thing that I would say to someone, if I had only 10 minutes to tell the story, I would let them know that my mother, her story is the fact that she started business after business and started NGO after NGO. And she never once thought about herself when she started doing those businesses and never started those NGOs. Her story lies in the fact that everything that she's done for someone else. And yes, it really is important for you to look after yourself and for you to be there for yourself. But I think if I had all of the hours in the world, I would tell a complete stranger the story of my mother. And if that's what they want to know about where I'm from, it would be through my mother. And I think because of her, that's why I work at Global Citizen. I work at an NGO. That's why I tell stories, is because I've seen through her work that people's stories need telling. People's narratives need to be shared. And so that's kind of the idea of it. But I don't know if you meant location wise, but that's where I come from philosophically.
It's still where you come from. I was actually going to ask you, is that why you sort of went into the work that you do and the kind of work that you do and the kind of structures of the work? Because I don't think Global Citizen is a building. I think it's a movement. I think it's a community. Did you sort of think about where you're from and who you're from and the family that you come from, and you just decided to sort of go into that?
Yeah, I think the main thing for me is that I've always wanted to stand up for people who aren't able to stand for themselves. That's something that I've really, in university, that's one thing that I really tried to push for in every single community that I was in. In high school, I was constantly just, speaking up against the fact that why is it that, it's very controversial. Why is it that the boarding school, only hears last minute about Civies Day, and we have to scurry around to find free clothes? But I always wanted to talk about the stories that people really just aren't listening to. And so I think that's where it came from. It came from the fact that my mother has always been a person who listens first before she acts. She listens to other people first before she does something. And getting into Global Citizen, it was quite cool, because the one thing I like about Global Citizen is that you don't have to be one person. You don't have to be just the activist. You don't have to be just the social justice advocate. You can also be a person who really likes Beyonce, or you can also just really be the person who really likes pop culture. And so you can be both those people, because no one is just one. And that, I feel was the because I've always been interested in fashion. I've always been interested in, pop culture, and my history in journalism. I was a lifestyle writer first. I was in lifestyle and leisure. And so to find a place that really brings my love of storytelling and really telling the news and telling it well, and then on the other hand, really having the opportunity to look into pop culture and see where those two things meet, I think that's where That's where it came from. That's why I'm like so glad I'm a global citizen. And that's why I'm so happy to be part of the movement.
I might just want to change my job then.
Well, if we ever have a podcast, definitely I'll consider you.
JC, do you have any questions that you sort of want to pose before we close off?
No last questions. I'll just say this conversation turned out well, the way I called it to turn out, because I mean, energy, I could just tell this is going to be quite an insightful one. So although we had limited time and I think that we didn't cover everything, and maybe in another conversation we might cover more, I really, really enjoyed this and I learned quite a bit. I learned the narrative between listening and then telling the story, listening and sharing. So, and the importance of that and how each of us can do that, although we're not necessarily the people that, are at the forefront or, the actual people that are in the stories at times, but it does a lot to listen and share the story. So thank you so much, Kanye. This was really, really awesome and insightful.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy that I've been able to share something and that you guys have also been able to impart some things on me. It's been such a privilege to be here with you.
So with that being said, guys, whether you're reading a funny tweet on Twitter, watching a crime movie, or even telling a story to someone or a juicy piece of gossip, you have to admit that stories are everywhere in our daily lives. Their authenticity and language are based on our daily lives and are entrenched in our daily lives. The only way to make them our own is to remember that stories are the one thing that binds us. So no matter where you are and no matter what stories you're going to tell, just make sure that they're your own. In closing, I'd like to thank our guest, Kanye. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your presence. And JC, thank you so much for helping me host. As always, your opinion is always not in vain, and you always help to sort of entrench and enrich the lives of MindShakers from different perspectives. So thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes,
and sorry about that, JC. Thank you so much to our MindShakers for listening to this episode on telling the African story. Please don't forget to follow us on social media and tell us your thoughts on telling the African story, whatever it means to you. Most of all, MindShakers, we encourage you to go out there and share anything that you might have learned from this episode as we all strive to learn together and boldly shape the world. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you for listening through to the end. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe on your preferred podcast platform, or all of them.
There's going to be plenty of exciting episodes to come, so if you want to catch that, follow us on all social media platforms at MindShack Podcast, and of course, follow us or subscribe to us on our YouTube platform or our YouTube channel at MindShack, and of course, see you on the next one.